Hi, this is Alan Binder again, and this is part 3 of the decline of NASA. As I was explaining in the previous section, I was talking about the failure of the 2 Mars 99 missions. And I'd like to continue with the second one since I had to interrupt that because of the cutoff on the video. As I started to explain, the Mars polar lander was supposed to have landed in the polar regions. And it also had 2 penetrator probes which would have impacted in the surface of Mars, dug into the surface, and then radioed data back about the characteristics of the surface from these 2 small probes. Well, when they were developing the lander, they found that when the way the sequence was to work, you came in on the aeroshell, which took up about 90% of the velocity. And then it was on a parachute, which took out another 9% of the velocity, roughly. And then the engines were supposed to fire and, of course, set the spacecraft down on the surface as a soft landing. Now, the 2 penetrators had been released before that, and they would just come down, do some aerobraking, and impact into the surface, and they were able to survive that impact. And that would give you 3 nice points of measurement over the surface of Mars. Well, what happened was, during the development of the lander and the testing of it, they found that when the landing legs were deployed, there was a sufficient shock that the computer which ran the spacecraft that was landing thought that it had landed, and so it shut the engines off. So they did a software fix on this problem so that that would not happen. However, they never tested the software fix. So it is believed that it didn't work, and the lander shut itself off when the legs were deployed, and it simply crashed. Now, the 2 penetrators also did not work, and so there's a question as to what happened. And no one really knows in that case. But here's the real story. In neither case were all these systems appropriately tested. They were simply built, went through minimal testing, and then flown. And if, I hope as you will read Lunar Prospect, you'll find we had the attitude of what you fly, you test, and what you test, you fly. And of course, my mission was totally successful because we had thoroughly tested every system before we ever launched. In the case of the Mars 99 missions, both of these failures, which cost well over $500 million, by the way, the polar lander was simply not properly tested. Otherwise, how can you explain how all 3 of the probes failed? There are many other examples of how NASA's management or lack thereof has caused failures. In the case, for example, of the Mars failures that I just mentioned, there were people at JPL who didn't even know who was heading the program. There was no single person who was responsible for the program. And so nobody had any responsibility. And it was just, to my opinion, it was just chaotic. As you will see if you read Lunar Prospect or Against All Odds, you will find that I was involved in every single phase of my mission, every single phase of the development of the spacecraft, its design, etc. And this is the way that you have to do these things. Now, I said in an earlier video that I would read to you on another video the testimony I gave to Congress after these 2 failures. Congress obviously wanted to know why a mission like mine was successful, as was Clementine. Very simple missions compared to these, very inexpensive, and yet we were able to do it where these more expensive missions, which were also supposed to have been done on the faster, better, cheaper mode, but they all failed. And as I said in an earlier video, NASA can't do faster, better, cheaper because it can't manage things properly. But I will read to you the testimony, and you will see how missions should be done, and you will understand why NASA missions can fail. Now, NASA has had a lot of good missions. There's no question of that. A lot of great science has been done. But there are far too many cases where the lack of management, the lack of good engineering has resulted in costly failures. And when missions cost, you know, $1/3 billion up to $1 billion and they're lost, these are tremendous burdens on the American taxpayer. So that's a few examples of how NASA management has failed us, and why we need to completely do things differently, and why I firmly believe that we need to commercialize most of these aspects. First, as you know from my discussions of Lunar Prospector, when things are done commercially, the costs are about 1/10 of what NASA spends on it. And the experience has been that when things are done commercially, they are seldom failures, where NASA has far too many failures. Thank you for listening. And I hope you will read about these things both in the Lunar Prospector book and in Moonquake.